I still remember that night, the smell of damp earth after the Savannah rain, and the wind brushing through the old oak trees outside the porch. I sat in the living room, beside a cup of cold tea, staring at the bank documents Sabrina had forgotten on the table. I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't blind. My name, Victoria Anderson, was still printed on the will, but the signature beneath it wasn't mine. The handwriting trembled slightly, weak and uneven. Someone who signed hundreds of contracts in her lifetime, like me, could never mistake that. Then I heard laughter from upstairs. Sabrina's voice, sweet and clear, poured into Adrian's ear like honey. "I just want everything to be stable, for you and for Mom." "For Mom?" I smirked. If I hadn't stumbled upon that bank statement today, I might have kept sitting here, foolishly believing that my daughter-in-law truly cared about this family's future. But no, she had already drained it all. The accounts, the properties, the stocks, everything I had built over a lifetime. And Adrian, my only son, said nothing. His silence hurt more than betrayal itself. That night, I didn't cry. I simply set the paper down, slowly poured myself another cup of cold tea, and whispered, softly, only for me to hear, "You chose the wrong woman to betray, Sabrina."
They say you only discover who you truly are after you've lost everything. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but for me, it was. I was once Victoria Anderson, the woman everyone in Savannah knew by name, the kind of woman people greeted with a polite smile, half respect, half caution. When I entered a boardroom, conversation stopped. When I signed a document, numbers began to move. I used to believe my life was a chain of right decisions, until I learned that one wrong decision about love could bring an empire down. I was born into an ordinary family in Savannah, but I knew early on I wasn't meant to stand behind anyone. My father was a shipyard worker. My mother worked in a small grocery store. I grew up with the smell of oil and iron, the sound of hammers striking steel, and the same sentence on repeat. "Sweetheart, all a girl needs is to find a good man." But I never wanted enough. I wanted more. At 21, I started at Savannah's oldest bank, the youngest secretary in the department. 5 years later, I was promoted to chief accountant. People began calling me Mrs. Anderson even though I wasn't married yet. That name sounded like a prophecy, strong, assured, untouchable. I met my husband, Thomas Anderson, during an investment contract signing. He was the quiet type, with the kind of eyes that listened. A true construction engineer, hands rough with dust, mind sharp as freshly polished steel. He once told me, "You're the first woman who ever scared me, and the first I've ever wanted for life." We married quietly, just a handful of friends and a small gathering at St. John's Church. Then he started his own firm, while I became chief financial officer at Harrison & Sons Construction, Savannah's leading company at the time. Together, we built a life both stable and elegant, not lavish, but solid, like the buildings his crews raised. Then Adrian was born, our only child. When Adrian came into the world, I was at the peak of my career. I was still signing contracts, still attending executive meetings, even 8 months pregnant. Thomas laughed and said, "You're not Wonder Woman." I replied, "But you love me because I act like her, don't you?" Then one day, an accident on site took him away. He died at the first project that bore his name. His death split my life clean in two. One half became the strong woman in the tailored suit, still working, still signing. The other half was a single mother, awake at 3 a.m. to a baby's cries, staring at her husband's dusty work shirt, but too afraid to fold it away. I once thought strength meant standing tall, until I had to be both mother and father at once. I stood at his grave and made a promise. "I'll raise our son just as you'd have wanted. He'll have everything." And I kept that promise. Adrian grew up lacking nothing. He had the best schools, the best tutors. I taught him how to carry himself, how to read people, how to hold his dignity, how to take responsibility. But perhaps I forgot to teach him one thing, how to stand on his own when I was gone. Adrian was the kind of son everyone adored. Gentle, quiet, with his father's calm, deep eyes. But as he grew, he inherited something else from me, the belief that love could fix everything. I once believed that too, until I learned that love can also be the quietest weapon that kills. He studied business management in Atlanta, then returned to Savannah just as I was nearing retirement. He said he wanted to do something for himself. I didn't stop him. I always believed my son would find his way. I just didn't know that way would lead straight into my own hell. Sabrina came into our lives like a cool breeze after a sweltering southern summer. I remember the first afternoon she stepped through our gate. White dress, low heels, a gentle smile. "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Anderson," she said. "I'm honored to finally meet the woman Adrian admires most." I smiled back. Something in her voice reminded me of my younger self, confident, polite, full of energy. But her eyes were different. They didn't see me as a mother. They studied me. From that day on, Sabrina fit into our family like a perfectly tailored glove. She helped set the table, checked on my health, reminded Adrian to call me when I worked late. Everyone said, "What a wonderful daughter-in-law she'll be." I smiled, because I knew the most perfect people are the ones you must watch most closely.
A year later, Adrian proposed. I didn't object. I bought them a small house in Habersham, where oak trees stretched their shadows across the sidewalks. I told them, "A house is only the beginning. What matters is how you keep it." They were married in my backyard. Sabrina was radiant, the Savannah sun glinting off her brown hair like gold. When she held my hand, she said, "I promise to make Adrian happy." I simply answered, "I hope you do." Everything about that day was perfect. Too perfect. Because when she smiled, her eyes weren't on Adrian. They were fixed on the second-floor window, where my safe was. At first, they still visited me every week. Sabrina could cook, could talk, could make everyone feel at ease. She always began her sentences with Mom and ended them with, "I just want what's best for you." And I, foolishly, believed her. But little things began to change. Adrian stopped talking to me about business. Joint investments slowly shifted names. One day at the bank, a clerk said, "Mrs. Anderson, we've processed the authorization for Ms. Sabrina, correct?" I smiled calmly. "Yes, but she's only allowed to view, not sign." I said that aloud, but I knew the game had already begun. One evening in June, they invited me to dinner. Sabrina cooked lemon-roasted chicken, Thomas's favorite dish. Their new house glowed warm under amber light, the scent of vanilla candles lingering in the air. On the table sat red wine and the crystal decanter I'd given them at their wedding. "Mom, I'm sorry if I've ever made you upset," Sabrina said gently. "I just want to take some of Adrian's burden, so he doesn't worry about you." I looked at her, then at Adrian. My son sat silently, swirling his wine, avoiding my eyes. "Thank you," I said, "but I can take care of myself." She smiled and leaned forward to pour more wine. The light fell across her face, half lit, half shadowed. Something in that smile sent a chill through me. It was the smile of someone who already knew she'd won. A month later, I found a bank envelope fallen from Sabrina's purse. The header read, "Liberty Mutual, Life Insurance Policy." Below it, my name, Victoria Anderson. I opened it. My signature was there, but I couldn't remember signing anything. I took it to the bank. The officer confirmed. "You authorized Ms. Sabrina to manage your insurance account, correct?" I smiled again. "Correct. But she doesn't know. I never let anyone move a piece without leaving a trail." That night, I opened my safe and pulled out a folder labeled Contingency. I'd kept it for the worst days. I began photographing every document, every copy, every signature. Savannah's night was windless, yet the oak branches outside still swayed. People say that's a sign a storm is coming, but I knew the storm was already here. The next morning, I called Sabrina, my voice steady. "Sweetheart, I want to meet with the lawyer this week to update my will. Would you like to come with me?" She hesitated, then said, "Of course, Mom. I'm always happy to help," I smiled. "Good. I want everything to be clear, so everyone knows exactly what they'll gain and what they'll lose." That was the moment the real game began. They say when a woman goes silent, there are only two possibilities. Either she's hurt or she's planning. I was the second kind. That morning, Savannah was veiled in a soft layer of mist, like velvet draped across the city. I sat at my wooden desk, the life insurance folder Sabrina had forged lying before me. Every line of text on that paper felt like a blade carving into my memory. She had forged my signature, not once, but several times. I picked up a pen and compared every curve, every angle. She learned fast, skilled enough to fool a stranger, but not me. On the first letter V, she curved to the right. I always lean left. A tiny detail, but to me, it was the first crack in the armor of someone far too confident. I called the bank, my tone calm enough to mask the storm inside me. "I just want to confirm the beneficiary of the Anderson estate account." The woman on the other end replied softly, "Yes, Mrs. Anderson." "The beneficiary was updated last month per your request. We have your signature and authorization form, and Ms. Sabrina Anderson is listed as a co-beneficiary, correct?" "That's right." I smiled, a smile meant for no one, just myself. The curtain had officially risen. That afternoon, I invited Sabrina to lunch at the Old Pink House, the restaurant Thomas and I had visited the day we married. It was timeless, soft golden lights, flickering candles, gentle jazz, and mirrors on every wall. She arrived 10 minutes late, beige coat, hair tied high, lips painted just enough. "Sorry, Mom, traffic was awful." "That's fine. I just got here too." We ordered 2 salads and a bottle of white wine. I didn't drink, just swirled the glass slowly, watching her reflection tremble in the pale liquid. "You've been busy lately, haven't you?" "A bit, yes. Adrian's relaunching a project, and I'm helping with the finances." "That sounds exhausting." "It's worth it, though." "I want you to relax, Mom. Everything's under control. Under control." She said those words. An intelligent person never says what they're truly thinking, unless they believe you're too dumb to understand it. I tilted my head slightly and smiled. "I'm sure you know exactly what you're doing." She raised her glass. The diamond on her ring caught the candlelight. "Of course, Mom. I'd never do anything to disappoint you." The words dripped with honey, but to me, they tasted like sugar-laced poison. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. There's nothing worse than a mother accusing her daughter-in-law. It only wins sympathy for the younger woman and condemnation for the elder. I'd seen it happen 100 times. Women like Sabrina know how to cry, how to say, "I only wanted to take care of her," and the world believes them. So I chose another way. I went to see Charles Lattimore, the old attorney who had once handled my husband's company affairs. Charles's eyes were lined with age, but still sharp as ever. "I take it you're not here to discuss your will?" "No, I'm here about a signature I placed the document copy on his desk." He glanced at it, then gave a low whistle. "She's good, but not good enough. I want every notarized document bearing my signature from the past 3 months. I can pull that through the public notary records. And the camera footage from the day she filed this one." His brow lifted. "You think she forged it?" I smiled slowly. "I know she did. Now I just need to prove she was arrogant enough to leave evidence." 3 weeks later, the whispers began, that I was losing my mind, that I'd forgotten signing papers and was now accusing my daughter-in-law. Who were they? Neighbors, bank tellers, even old acquaintances. One morning, Adrian showed up at my door, his face tight with concern. "Mom, I heard you went to see a lawyer. Do you really think Sabrina forged your signature?" I don't think, Adrian. I'm clarifying, Mom. She loves you. You can't treat her this way, loves me, or loves my assets? He went silent. I looked at my son, the mirror of his father, down to the bone. Except he lacked one thing, a spine. Adrian, I said evenly, I once saved an entire company because I spotted a single misplaced digit. Do you really think I can't tell when I'm being deceived? Please, Mom. Don't turn this into a war. I stood, lips curling slightly. My dear, the war began the moment you chose silence. The following days, I lived as if nothing had changed. Morning tea, walks through Forsyth Park, smiles at old neighbors. Everyone thought I'd dropped it. Sabrina called a few times, voice dripping with sweetness. Mom, I'm sorry if there's been a misunderstanding. I just want you to have a comfortable life. Oh, don't worry. I've never felt more comfortable. She thought I'd surrendered. She didn't know I was giving her rope, enough to hang herself. I started installing tiny cameras around the house, in my study, near the safe. I didn't need to capture everything, just enough to show, when the curtain fell, who the worst actor was. One evening, Charles called. Victoria, I found the notary footage from the day she submitted the papers. And? The woman signing wasn't you. It was Sabrina. I went silent. Thank you, Charles. Keep the original with you. When I say it's time, hand it over to the police. I hung up and stared out the window. Savannah's city lights shimmered like molten gold in the glass. I thought of Thomas, of the promise I made by his grave. I'll protect our son. Then whispered, Now, love, it's time I protect myself. A week later, Sabrina called. Mom, Adrian and I were thinking of coming over for dinner. Would that be okay? Of course. I knew why she wanted to come. To see if I'd made a move. I set the table, cooked her favorite beef stew. When they arrived, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Except for one thing, the tiny camera hidden behind the vase right in front of me. You look so much better, Mom, Sabrina said. Thanks to you, dear. I sleep better knowing someone's taking care of me. I always do, Mom. Yes, especially making sure you know exactly how much I have left. She froze, then smiled lightly. You do have a sharp sense of humor. I'm not joking. I'm simply saying what others are too scared to. Mom, stop, Adrian interrupted. No, son, I said quietly. Tonight, I'm done staying silent. I stood and placed an envelope on the table. Inside were photos, stills from the notary's security footage. You know, Sabrina, I said, cameras have better memory than you think. Her face drained of color. Mom, this isn't what it looks like. No. It's exactly what it looks like. I turned to Adrian. You think I'm making this up? Open your eyes. He stood, trembling. Mom, I need some air. And he left, leaving two women standing in a room burning with light. Sabrina tried to steady her breath. I never meant to hurt you. Quiet. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. You're clever, Sabrina. But I've taught smarter people than you how to fall. You picked the wrong woman to play with. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the silence of my house. The little red light of the camera blinked steadily, recording me sitting there, holding a glass of untouched wine. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange calm wash over me. The storm had arrived, and this time, I would be the one steering it. Tomorrow, I would go to the police, with the footage, the documents, and the real will. No one would ever again call me crazy. I would show them. Victoria Anderson doesn't need to scream to be heard. There's one thing people don't understand about women like me. We don't get angry because we lost money. We get angry because we were underestimated. After working with the police, I thought everything would become clear. But Sabrina was smarter than I expected. Just 3 days later, Savannah's social media was flooded with rumors. Retired millionaire Mrs. Anderson accused of stalking her daughter-in-law. Tension in the Anderson family caused trace to a dispute over the will. Sources say Mrs. Victoria shows signs of cognitive decline. Those lines appeared beside a photo of me stepping out of the police station, stern-faced, with camera flashes exploding. No words were needed. People had already chosen sides: the side of youth, tears, and the story of the long-suffering daughter-in-law. Adrian stayed silent, a kind of silence more cruel than betrayal. Savannah is small. Rumors travel faster than the river wind. Old friends at church avoided my gaze. The bank manager's tone turned dry. Even Mrs. Johnson, my neighbor of 30 years, stopped leaving apple pie at my door each morning. I didn't blame them. I simply realized, this is the price you pay when you've lived too strong. When you fall, people applaud. But I wasn't falling. I was merely bowing my head to tie my laces. One morning, she walked into my house unannounced. White blazer, Hermes bag, neat hair, the poise of someone who believed the whole world was on her side. "Mom, I think it's time to stop." "We're all tired." "I'm not tired, Sabrina. But if you want to talk, let's talk." She placed a stack of papers on the table. "This is a property distribution agreement. I just need your signature so everything is clear. You keep this house, you keep your personal accounts. Adrian and I will withdraw from the rest." I looked straight into her eyes. "Do you think I'm that stupid?" "No, Mom." She smiled lightly, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "I just think you're too old to keep fighting." I said nothing. I uncapped a pen and signed, but not with ink, with a pencil. She didn't notice. That evening, Sabrina posted a photo with Adrian captioned, "Family, after all the misunderstandings, is still the safest place." Over 2,000 likes. Everyone praised her for being humble, reasonable. I just sat there looking at my phone screen, sipping tea, and murmured to myself, "You won in the eyes of the world, but I won on the deed." Because the paper she held was a fake copy, I had replaced with a version marked by a hidden watermark that reads, "Null copy," visible only when scanned officially at the bank. I wanted her to believe she'd won, so she would submit forged evidence to the court herself. But even the strongest have moments of weakness. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The chair where Thomas used to read the paper now held only the ticking of a clock. I thought of Adrian, the child I once lulled to sleep every night, now looking at me like an enemy. I thought of my husband, the man who once promised, "You will never be alone." Then I looked around and saw only myself and a cup of cold tea. I bowed my head, and tears fell for the first time in years, not because I'd lost, but because I understood. Every victory demands the price of loneliness. I wiped my tears, lifted my head, and whispered an oath to myself. From now on, I won't cry. Whoever makes me shed tears will shed blood. The next morning, I went to see Attorney Charles. He was reading the paper when I walked in. "I thought you'd come sooner." "I'm right on time." "Sabrina is pushing herself into the pit." I handed him an envelope. Inside was the copy of the document she'd forced me to sign, stamped with null copy. "I want the system to display this watermark when she files at court." "And you want me to?" "Say nothing. Wait until she opens her own mouth." He smiled, his eyes a mix of admiration and fear. "Mrs. Anderson, you are a woman one should never cross." I didn't stop there. I contacted the bank's branch manager, the one who used to work under me 15 years ago. "I need the Liberty Mutual account statements for the last 6 months." "That's sensitive, you know." "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. Just make sure when the police request them, the data is ready." "Understood, ma'am." Then I sent a handwritten letter to Adrian. Just one sentence. "When you see the truth, I hope you'll have the courage not to bow your head." 3 weeks later, the court opened the hearing. Anderson versus Anderson. All of Savannah came to watch. They called it a battle between two generations, A cold, brilliant, widowed mother and a young, capable, modern daughter-in-law. The press lined up. Sabrina entered with her attorney, dressed like a victorious executive. I chose black white pearls, slow and steady steps. Her lawyer rose first, voice ringing. Your Honor, the defendant, Mrs. Victoria Anderson, signed to transfer assets but now denies it. We have copies and her signature as evidence. The examiner took the paper and fed it into the scanner. A moment of silence. Then on the screen, the words "null copy" flared bright red, like blood. The courtroom held its breath. Sabrina went pale. I sat still and said softly, "It seems she submitted the wrong test copy of mine." Her lawyer stammered, "This must be a printing error." The judge's gavel struck. "No, this is falsified evidence. Bailiff, detain Ms. Sabrina Anderson for investigation." Whispers swelled, camera flashes detonated. Sabrina turned to look at me, and for the first time her eyes held no pride, only fear. I didn't look back. I only said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear, "Never steal from someone who once taught others how to guard the safe." Adrian sat at the edge of the courtroom, head in his hands. I went to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mom." His voice was raw. "No, I'm sorry for making you believe kindness is always repaid." He cried. I didn't. The anger in me was gone. Only emptiness remained. As the officers led Sabrina past, she turned. "You've won. Are you happy now?" I met her gaze. "No, because I didn't win. I only took back what was mine." The courtroom doors closed behind her. The sound fell like a period at the end of a chapter. That night, I returned home, opened the safe, and took out an old photograph. Thomas holding Adrian, me beside them, all three of us smiling wide. I set it on the table next to the sealed documents. On the table lay an old bracelet, the wedding gift Thomas once gave me. I put it on, looked at myself in the mirror, and realized the woman staring back was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. "Good night, Thomas," I whispered. I kept my promise. Our son is safe now. Outside, the Savannah wind moved through the oaks. I turned off the lights and let the darkness blanket the house. No more fear, no more bitterness, only silence, the most beautiful sound after an absolute victory. On the first morning after the incident, I woke to a thin light pouring through the window of the nursing home. No more smell of sedatives, no more rhythm of high heels striking the floor, only the wind slipping through the white curtain, brushing my cheek. I survived, but something in me died that night, the fragile belief that kindness is always repaid with love. 2 weeks later, I was allowed to leave the facility. Harold, the devoted, elderly attorney, drove me home in his old sedan. As the car turned down the small slope into Cascade Heights, my old house appeared. Dusty roof tiles, a rust-streaked iron fence, stone steps split with cracks. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" Harold asked, hands still on the wheel. "I was born there, married there, buried my husband there. If I don't go back, who will bring it back to life?" He said nothing more, just nodded, then came around to open the door and help me out. Crossing the porch, the smell of damp and dried jasmine filled my lungs. Every step on the old wooden floorboards sounded like the whispers of the past. I looked around. The wedding photo, the pendulum clock, the embroidered cloth my husband left me, all still there, as if they'd been waiting for my return. On the living room table, Marcus's framed portrait stood neatly in place. I picked it up and gazed at my son's smile, gentle, young, and now only a memory. "Son, I kept my word," I said softly. My voice was hoarse, trembling like dry leaves. News of the case spread through Atlanta. Headlines blared, "Daughter-in-law poisons mother-in-law to seize life insurance." Some TV stations ran ethics panels, debating whether I should forgive. Calls came into the nursing home. Some sent flowers. Some sent letters cursing Jennifer. I didn't speak to the press. I said nothing. I knew that sometimes silence is the loudest voice. On the day Jennifer stood trial, a fine rain fell. I sat in the front row, between Harold and Angela. Jennifer wore a gray prison uniform, hair cropped short, eyes sunken. When the prosecutor read the charges, she hung her head, hands trembling. When it was Harold's turn, he spoke slowly. The defendant has admitted to forgery and conspiracy to poison. But it is the victim, Mrs. Viola Smith, who has asked the court to grant a chance for restoration, not destruction. Your Honor, justice is not always found in a sentence. Sometimes it lies in a hand that chooses to hold instead of push away. The courtroom fell still. I looked at Jennifer. Our eyes met across the crowd. No hatred remained, only two women, one old, one young, standing between consequence and what's left of human mercy. The judge ruled 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of community service at the city's elder care centers. When she heard it, Jennifer broke down in tears. I did not. I simply exhaled, as if setting down a stone I had carried for years. After the case, my house became a temporary refuge for Angela. She quit the nursing home, saying she wanted to help you start over. We spent many nights at the kitchen table drafting the first plan for the Marcus Foundation, a small organization to help older adults who had been deceived, stripped of assets, or abandoned by their families. Use your son's name for the fund, Angela suggested, because everything you do comes from a mother's love. I nodded. And because Marcus deserves to be remembered by something good. We had no money. Harold gathered some old legal files and filed the paperwork. A small church on the south side of Atlanta lent us a back room for an office. It had exactly 2 desks, an old computer, and the smell of rotting wood. But it was the first place I felt truly alive again. On opening day, only 8 people came. 4 volunteer lawyers, 2 nurses, and 2 elderly neighbors. I gave a speech, hands shaking, but voice steady. We're not here to talk about the past, but to help those who never got the chance to be trusted. That sentence was later painted on the foundation wall, just beneath the Marcus Foundation logo. Jennifer was released after 2 years. I learned from Harold's letter. She wants to see you. I didn't reply immediately. Not until a Saturday morning when sunlight pierced the curtains and the smell of coffee filled the house did I write a single line. If you truly want to change, the Marcus Foundation is always open. 3 days later, she came. No appointment, no flowers. Just a young woman in a simple white shirt standing at the iron gate, looking at me through the slats. "May I come in?" she asked. "That's up to you," I replied. "The door isn't locked." She stepped in slowly, taking in the house where she had once tried to kill a woman, and now asked to begin again within it. Jennifer started at the Marcus Foundation as an unpaid volunteer. She arrived early, cleaned, made tea, recorded case notes. At first, people were wary, but after a few weeks, Angela whispered, "She's gentler with the patients than I am." I said nothing, just watched, quietly. One afternoon, a 90-year-old named Mildred Johnson came seeking help. Her son had tricked her into signing away her house. Jennifer sat with her, holding her hand throughout. When the old woman cried, Jennifer dabbed her tears and said, "You won't be alone." I know how that feels. I stood outside the door and listened to every word, my heart tightening. I realized some remorse needs no speech. It appears in how you tend to the pain of others. The next month, Jennifer gave me a notebook. "My prison journal," she said. "Would you like to read it?" I read. The early pages were messy, full of anger and defensiveness. I don't deserve to be here. But gradually, the handwriting grew smaller, neater. I miss Marcus. I miss Mother. I miss dinners that smelled of dried jasmine. I'm afraid, but I'm alive. The last page read, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm only asking to begin. I closed the journal, a sharp ache warming into something gentler. The next morning I wrote back, Begin, Jennifer. Begin as if guilt had never existed. From then on, she changed visibly. She took a caregiver course, then community mental health training. She organized tea and truth sessions. Older adults gathered to drink tea and tell their life stories, recorded for the archive. Tea once cost me everything, she said. Now I want it to heal. I smiled. Tea was never guilty. Only the hands that brewed it were. 2 years passed. The Marcus Foundation became a citywide refuge. The press began calling us the place where elders learn to trust again. We opened 2 more branches, one in Macon, one in Augusta. Angela led clinical work. Jennifer handled communications and HR. As for me, old as I am, I sat at the main office reading thank you letters from those we'd helped. A letter from Texas read, Because of your story, I dared to sue my son-in-law for stealing my mother's assets. An elderly woman in Alabama sent a photo of herself in front of the home she'd reclaimed. Thank you for proving that justice has no age. Each time I read them, I saw Marcus smiling from the frame on my desk. One April morning, Harold walked into the office with an envelope. The City of Atlanta is awarding you Honorary Citizen for Social Contribution, he said, with a hint of pride. I laughed. I'm just an old woman telling stories. You tell stories with your whole life, he replied. I agreed to attend, not for recognition, but because I wanted to say one last thing. The day of the ceremony, Atlanta blazed with sun. The hall was full, press and locals alike. In the front row, I saw Angela, saw Harold, and Jennifer. She sat at the end, hands clasped, unable to meet my eyes. When Harold introduced me, I stepped up to the lectern. I didn't read the prepared remarks. I spoke from the heart. I once believed justice came from the courts, but truly, it begins in every kitchen, in every cup of tea, in every choice we make when no one is watching. I was betrayed by my own family. Yet today I stand here with that person, because I choose to believe people can change. The Marcus Foundation isn't the fund of an old woman, but of those who were forgotten and learned to trust again. The hall went utterly still. Then applause rose like a wave. I looked down and saw Jennifer wiping tears. I added, voice-catching, Thank you, Jennifer, for coming back. The applause swelled. She stood and bowed. No one knew, but I did, that this was the moment the Marcus Foundation was truly complete. Time moved on. Jennifer relocated to Augusta to launch the new branch. She wrote weekly, sending photos of elders she cared for. One picture made me cry. She sat by a patient's bed, holding a cup of peppermint tea. The caption read, This time, it's only tea, Mother. 3 years later, I wrote a memoir, Justice in Silence. On the last page, I wrote, Justice is not punishment. It is the moment we are strong enough to choose mercy amid the ashes. It was printed in a small run but spread through women's groups and nursing homes. They called me the Mother of Quiet Justice. I only smiled. I am no icon. I am simply someone who learned how to look at a wound without fear. That spring, I visited the new Augusta branch. Jennifer greeted me with a bright smile and a tight embrace. She led me through the back garden, now overflowing with jasmine. Do you remember this scent? She asked. I inhaled deeply. Peppermint and jasmine mingled, sharp at first, sweet at the finish. I remember, I said, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. She smiled. I planted it to remind myself. What once hurt us can also heal us. We drank tea under the lavender. It was still peppermint, but not bitter. I looked around and saw elders receiving care, volunteers laughing, and Jennifer, once a criminal, teaching young nurses about ethics in caregiving. In that moment I realized, some revenge requires no sword, only the restoration of trust. Some wounds are merely the beginning of another life. At sunset, Jennifer walked me to the car. She whispered, "You know, there was a time I wished you dead. Now I only want you to live a long, long time." I squeezed her hand and smiled gently. "We've both died once, Jennifer. The rest is just living better." The car rolled away. In the mirror, she still stood there waving, the sign behind her reading, "Marcus Foundation, East Branch." The scents of jasmine, lavender, and peppermint braided together like a harmony of forgiveness. That night, back home, I wrote the final lines of my journal. I was once a mother who lost everything. But today, I am a woman granted a second chance, not by anyone else, but by my own heart. And if one day you're betrayed, pushed to the bottom, remember that justice can arrive in silence, in a cup of tea brewed anew by hands that have learned to love. I set down my pen and closed the notebook. Atlanta burned red outside, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I once believed that justice only came when the court ruled, when the guilty were punished, but now I know true justice arrives when a heart dares to choose forgiveness over revenge. Because sometimes compassion itself is the fairest sentence we can give each other. I am Viola Smith, and this is my story about betrayal, redemption, and finding light again in the dark. If this story made you believe that the truth always finds its way home, then hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so every week I can share another journey where kindness is tested and justice is rewritten through the human heart.